Okay. Okay. So our topic for today is again introduction to helping and helping theory and models of effective helping is where we're going to start. So this is going to be kind of more of a general conversation, and then we'll get into specific specific details as we move along in the course. Um, the thing that I think is always important to ask is what is helping, and what is helping in a group sense. And if you think about it, anytime we're helping, we're doing it for the good of a group of some type, whether we're doing it for another individual because two people make a group, or whether we're doing it for a community, or in our case that we talk about in this class, we're doing it for a certain number of people who are having life issues such as addiction or trauma or mental health issues. Um, but it's important to understand that helping is a group process. And it's important to understand what our role as a facilitator or a therapist is. Okay. And I always like to think of the therapeutic or the therapist role in something that happened to me years ago. I come from Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and kind of like here in Sells and Tucson, if we want to get away, we go to somewhere like Rocky Point or one of our mountainous areas near Tucson, just to get away and into nature. Here on the nation, there's a lot of places you can go just to get away. Um, where I went as a young adult and whatnot is we would go to Yellowstone National Park on weekends and hang out and see the park, usually in spring and summer, because winter it's a little bit more difficult there. And now my ex father-in-law, the thing that he always wanted to do when he went to Yellowstone Park, and I don't know why. He wanted to be one of the individuals who seek out grizzly bears and find them and see if they can spot them. I never understood why he wanted to see grizzly bears and not cute little birds or something like that. But it was grizzly bears that he was interested in trying to find. But in the park, in order to find grizzly bears and whatnot, you had to go off kind of what's called the unbeaten trail. These are trails that are designated, but they're kind of off the main roads. And they usually have a path one way in and one way out. And usually they're near steep cliffs where one side you're going down, the other side you have to go up. Um, and so these are the roads that we'd often find ourselves on. And one year we had a really wet winter and then a very quick warming. So it created a lot of moisture in the soil. And there was a road we were traveling on where there was a microburst, which made it so a large pine tree went across the road. Okay. Now, when we came up on it, we were like 10 cars back, and me and my father-in-law, we walked up, and there were all these people around this tree. And they had various items on top of the tree, and they had an axe, which makes sense, a hammer. They had a car jack. They had some rope. I never remember to put a picture. There were even blankets on top of it, and they were all trying to figure out how could they move this tree so everybody could get out. And there were some really intelligent people. I believe one of them was an engineer. Another was construction workers. I believe there was a teacher and a few other people around this tree trying to figure out with these tools how they could get the tree out of their way. Now, if you know anything about pine trees, you know that the top of the tree is actually fairly light, and it gets heavier and heavier as you go down to the trunk. Okay. And while they were kind of thinking and guessing about this tree, all of a sudden they saw the tree move slightly up. Um, and they were all kind of, what the heck's going on? And they look up to the extent of the tree, and there's this young kid, about 11 or 12, lifting up the tip of the tree. And they kind of instantly thought, well, if that kid could lift that top of that very tree, all of us, if we got down to a certain length of the tree, could push the tree up and push it over kind of like a pendulum to the other side. And that's exactly what they did. Um, now, so they went from there to, we got a trail back, and often I know you might ask, well, what is the point of that story? Okay, is in the group setting, we'll bring tools, and our clients will bring tools. We'll lay them all out and we'll discuss them. But there will always be barriers and whatnot to understanding the use of those tools, or how to facilitate success. And when we think about facilitating and helping others, I'd like you to think of that 11 to 12-year-old boy who just picked up the tip of the tree, which allowed the other people there to have that aha moment of what they should do to get rid of their roadblock, which in this case was a tree. And that's really what facilitation is all about. I have had lots and lots of students. I've supervised lots of social workers, counselors, just human service providers. And a lot of them come in our field wanting to change the world, wanting to change people's lives for the better. And while that is a wonderful purpose, a lot of times in our field, they get very frustrated because they don't start to see the change that they intended to when they came into the field of the helping fields. And it can be frustrating, but if you go into the field with the idea that you can seed the possibility of change, and then you remember that you cannot, as a helper, a therapist, or anyone, change another person, but you can instill with them the knowledge and the ability to do so. If they choose, you've been successful, like that 11 to 12-year-old boy. And so I'd like to start with this because we may not always necessarily be change makers, but we can always have the opportunity to seed the ability to change. Okay, so I want to start the class off with that idea of what a facilitator is, what a therapist is, and then we can move on into our next topic, which I want to get into. Oh, where is it? No. Let me get out of here. I thought there was another slide before we got to this. Okay, well, I'll leave it here. All right. So the topic that I want to kind of elaborate more on for today and in this class is a few different theories of helping, and why someone who is well trained is necessary for the helping field. And we're going to start with, now I should back up a little bit. Humans have engaged in helping since humans have existed. Okay, we can look back and we can see in Western culture, we can see the ancient Greeks with their philosophers, their religious people. Religion played a major role in trying to help change and make people for the better according to their views. We can see in other cultures the idea of the shaman, the elders giving knowledge, different ceremonies. the medicine man, the medicine woman. And we can see these things come through centuries and centuries. It goes back to almost recorded time that we have engaged in some type of wisdom teaching or wisdom help. Okay. But when we talk about modern counseling and modern therapies, the place that we can kind of have a starting point with, as far as the investigation of what we do when we engage in the counseling and therapy process, starts with a gentleman named Dr. Sigmund Freud. Okay. And I want to give the reasons why, if you're going into the counseling field as a modern profession, I would encourage you to look at Freud, because he's kind of the roots or beginnings, along with him and Dr. Brunner, who was a colleague of his. But Dr. Sigmund Freud and Dr. Brunner, let me start with Sigmund Freud. And if you've been in one of my Psych 101 classes, you can maybe take a little bit nap at this as I explain this. But Dr. Freud was not actually interested in going into the medical, psychiatric, and psychology field in the beginning. He wanted to become a very serious scientist, and really do science work, and he was very good at it. He had a lot of talents into it. And his interest was in the nervous system. I believe his doctoral dissertation was on the nervous system of a frog or something like that. But Dr. Freud was a Jew at the time, and he was going through the German schools and whatnot. And this is where a lot of anti-Semitism started in the late 1800s. And so Freud wasn't allowed to come into the academia and into the research arena. So he ended up opening a medical practice that focused it on neurology. And it's much like the neurology we see today, where a person comes in and they say they can't feel their hand anymore, or they're feeling, and they do tests and whatnot to determine whether it's something physiological or psychological in some way. And at the time, one of the main disorders that people came to seek Dr. Freud or Dr. Brunner for was something called hysteria. Okay. To give you an idea of hysteria, you can think of someone who is hysterical. They're kind of, they look like they're almost having a psychotic break. They can't control themselves, their behaviors, those kind of things. That's similar to what we're talking about when we talk about hysteria. And at the time, I'll tell you where the term hysteria is it was believed that it was mainly a female disorder, and hence its term hysteria. If you think of the term hysterectomy, or histo is the female's sexual organs. And so if you have a hysterectomy, it's a removal of the female sexual organs. Hysteria was this idea that the womb of the woman was wandering around the body and creating all this havoc that the person was experiencing. Okay. And so these were the main kind of psychological based people that Brunner and Freud saw. Now, I do want to fast forward a couple, 3 or 4 decades, and I will tell you hysteria as a symptomology. Both men and women can display hysteria. In fact, one of the last reports that came out in the 70s, I think, actually suggested that men had more hysterical symptoms than women. But at that time, men had their repressed emotions, so they weren't going to admit themselves. But in order for a woman to receive care from someone, they had to have permission from their father or their husband. And if you can guess, the husband, when they see their wife going hysterical, they instantly send them to get treatment for that hysterical behavior. So kind of give it a cultural background on that term. But we'll talk about Dr. Bruner first. Dr. Bruner had a famous patient named Anna O, who came to Dr. Bruner one time, and this is kind of the myth of it. I probably the mythology of it. Came to Dr. Bruner and said, "Hey, I'm telling all my friends about your services." And he's kind of, well, thank you, but what do you mean? What are you talking about? And she said, well, I come in and you and I talk with each other, and just by that talk, my symptoms are alleviated for 2, 3, 4 weeks until I come see you again. It's like my disorder goes away for a little while. And then I come back and we talk some more, and I can go and be hysterical free for another time period. And Bruner and Freud kind of got together and they formulated this term called the talking cure, which then eventually evolved into the modern counseling forms of psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, counseling. And eventually in the 1940s and 50s, it's going to be applied to group settings. I will say, even though, again, if we look historically, people have got into groups and discussed things that were troubling the individual or the communities for centuries. The formal modern therapeutic version of it appeared in about the 1940s, 1950s, with things like the 12-step program and other mental health type programs, and mainly inpatient settings and those kinds of things. So individual therapy kind of precedes what would then become group therapies later in the 20th century. But what Freud and Bruner started to focus on, and what Freud definitely focused on, is that the reason why people cannot solve their problems on their own is because many of their problems come from an unconscious space that only a person who is trained in trying to release those unconscious desires, those unconscious drives, can get to and help the client understand what they're going through. And if you think about this, this is a great business model, is that if you're having psychological problems, it's due to unconscious processes that you don't understand, and therefore you need to go to a trained professional for them to kind of find out what those unconscious drives are, so that you can then work on them and alleviate them. It's a genius plan, but it also gives us some of our social stigma about helping people, especially in our modern times. We have family who have depression, anxiety, go through trauma and everything else. And our instant propensity is you need to go see a professional. And this kind of comes back from this notion that started with Freud and Bruner, that only a trained professional has access to why you do what you do, which, as we will see when we get into group work, that's not always true. In fact, part of the framework of doing group is for the group members who have experienced the same thing share what they're going through, and we facilitate a way to approach it better through the therapeutic process. But this is kind of maybe what keeps us employed in the field instead of people just going to family and other people. But anyways, just a conspiracy theory. Okay. So Freud, though, believed, because the main people that he worked with that had hysterical symptoms had been sexual assault victims. They had criminal, violent behaviors. And so he believed that there must be some basic drives that make it so these individuals do what they do. Okay. Now, he used evolutionary theory. Um, and what he used that evolutionary theory is to try and decide what are the common instincts among us that drive us all, not just people who have a mental illness or hysteria as it was defined. And eventually he came down to, let me, let me, he came to the idea that we have a life instinct. We create life, we reproduce, we do those things. And we have what's called the death instinct, the realization that life ends and that we need to protect our life as we move through it. Okay. And then he's going to narrow these down to two basic biological behavioral instincts that he's going to call sex and aggression. Okay. Um, I will say for the rest of this conversation, I would encourage you not to have children around or put some headphones on just in case, because we're going to kind of get into some of these processes here in just a minute. Now, he believed that these two processes we don't have direct access to. Okay, the sex and aggression instinct was housed in what Freud called the id. Okay, and it is the basis for our drives and why we do what we do. And he also believed, if you look at this iceberg diagram, just like an iceberg, the majority of our psychological world, 90% of our psychological world, exists within the unconscious, and our awareness of who we are and what we do comprises only about 10%, those safe things that we use to navigate our world. Now, if we only had an id, according to Freudian theory, we would all be just going and trying to have sex with each other and beat up each other. Okay. Which, if you can guess from an evolutionary perspective, we probably wouldn't have survived as a species that long if that's all we were doing is releasing those needs or those drives. And so the id, in order to deal with our survival, developed the ego. And the ego has access to our conscious or our lived world and the unconscious needs of our id. And what the ego is trying to do is negotiate what it needs to do to exist in the world and satisfy also those drives of the id. Okay. And what was I about to say? So it negotiates between the two to make it so that our behaviors are advantageous to us, but at the same time trying to satisfy those needs. Okay. Now, I don't want to say much more about this, but the other unconscious component is what was called the superego, which was the perfectionist aspect. It is the aspect of the unconscious that says this is who I ought to be. And it's that contradiction with the id. Okay. And so it's what they call the moral component. And Anita, I see your hand up. What's your question?
Sorry. I kind of cut out when you were at this PowerPoint for id. What is id?
Okay, so the id is the id is houses those two basic drives of the unconscious mind. So it houses what Freud believed was universal in humans, which is the drive towards sex and aggression. Does that clarify that?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. And so what the ego is doing is trying to satisfy the needs of the id while also doing what's socially appropriate to make it so we survive in this world with each other. And then the superego is kind of the antagonist of the id, saying these are the morally correct or the perfectionist things to do in order to repress the needs of the id. Okay. So awareness. Okay. And so I always like to bring up this little cartoon because it shows some of Freud's influences on popular culture. If you look at, if you, even when you look at things like religion and whatnot, pre-Freudian theory, there was no comments in the Bible or religious talking about two entities vying for your soul. But when Freud introduced what we now call, what he called the superego, which is our angel, and the id, which is our devil, this is where this idea that we have these two things vying for our attention and for our decisions, and they're working against each other. And Homer right here, he represents his ego trying to decide what he should do in a given situation. Okay, that's a Freudian idea about the devil and angels and vying for your soul and all those kinds of things. And you are that ego, that person who is trying to make the right decision on how to move forward. Okay. And as I said, so just kind of reviewing some of these, id, as you can guess, works off what's called the pleasure principle. It starts with eros, or the life instincts, and thanatos, which is a death instinct. Libido, if you look at the modern term for libido, it usually means how sexual someone is. If they have a high libido, they're highly sexual. Low libido, they have low sexuality. For Freud, libido meant it's what gave us all of our psychic energy, so all of our thinking abilities and whatnot. And if you think about it, this is an illogical component. We have two opposing forces. So it's primitive, chaotic, unchangeable, amoral, and illogical part of it. Okay. When we look at the ego, of course, we could probably guess that it operates on the reality principle. Okay. Only portion of the unconscious that actually contacts reality, and it mediates reality and the pleasure principle. It's kind of what you would consider the executive branch of the system. Now, in again modern terms, when we start looking at things like neo-Freudians and whatnot, we're going to change the definition of an ego as ourself. It's what makes up who we are as an individual. And so you hear terms like someone has a fragile ego. It means that they have a hard time with criticism, those types of things. So there's an evolution of that term, but this is what it meant originally. Now, the superego operates on the idealistic principle. Okay. But the thing that I want to think, because I think in a lot of modern terms, we equate morality with happiness. Okay. That a moral person must be a happy person. But the super ego doesn't work towards happiness. It works towards perfection. So if you think of someone who is very OCD about cleaning, in Freudian terms, they would have an oversized super ego because they have to have everything perfectly clean. Okay. And it's two forces, what we should not do and what we should do. Okay. And again, its purpose was to help control those sexual and aggressive impulses of the id. Okay. So that kind of summarizes each of those components in a little bit more detail. So if you're a visual learner, this is kind of the model. We have reality coming to the ego. We have id. We have the moral and ideals. And then that ego decides on our behavioral and emotional response. Okay. And if we want to think it in a more visual term, this is kind of a simplification of these three systems. If we have an oversized id that is larger than our ego and superego, we tend to be what Freud termed as pleasure seekers, risk takers, gamblers, aggressive, violent, If we look at this model here, if we have an oversized superego, we tend to be that person that always is feeling guilt ridden, that they're not doing the best that they can do. And they always feel like they're failing. Okay. And in a Freudian model, a healthy person is someone who has a larger ego, but an equal size id and an equal size superego. Which allows the ability to negotiate between these two drives, these drives that we have that give way to our behavior. Okay, so some of the I'm going to skip this one because it's not really. Now, with that being said, Anna Freud, who was Sigmund Freud's daughter, is going to state that there's ways that people try to protect their ego, to protect who they view themselves as. Okay. And she's going to term a term called defense mechanisms. And it's worth going over these defense mechanisms in this class, because you will see these in even modern therapies today. Sometimes they're called thinking errors, sometimes they're called cognitive errors, but they're things that we do in order to protect who we are. Okay. And I want to go through these and I want you to kind of write them down and make some notes about them, because when we're doing group treatment or even individual treatment, when we see people in a group start to use these defense mechanisms, we need to rethink the progress of the group. We either need to work with that person on an individual level, or we need to rethink our approach with the group, because obviously they're going into a repressed state, as you would say. They're feeling intimidated. They're feeling that everyone's kind of pointing the finger at them, saying you're a bad person, those kinds of things. So I want you to pay attention to these in this theory part, because when you see these things start to happen within your group setting, you will want to stop as the facilitator and rethink your group process. Okay. So the first defense mechanism is denial. Okay. And denial, as it states here, is not acknowledging that there's a problem. Okay. So probably the one that I've ran into is when I used to do a relapse prevention and working with addicts, is the individual who denies that they're an alcoholic or denies that they're a drug abuser. Okay. Even though they have all of the telltale signs, the symptoms, they say, I don't have a problem. I'm not. And then they kind of start doing social comparison where I'm not as bad as someone. I handle my drinking. It's not a problem. And all of those kinds of things. Okay. That's one of the most clear examples, especially for those who in the class who are working with addicts. You'll see this a lot. Okay. We also see it when people get diagnosed, for the example here, with a disorder of some type, not believing the diagnosis. I know when I was diagnosed with congestive heart disease, I went to two other doctors because I just couldn't, I denied that I had it. So, and so if you do trauma groups with people who have been diagnosed with cancer or cancer survivors or anyone from chronic diseases, you'll run into denial as well, that it's just not happening to me. Other areas, especially dealing with trauma, is sometimes, survivors of abuse deny what happened to them. Offenders, will deny that they committed a crime or did something wrong. So this is a good way to kind of tell where a client is at, because a person who is in denial You can throw as much therapy at them as you want, but it's not going to get anywhere until they come to some point of acceptance that they have a problem or they have an issue. Okay. So when you run into denial in a group or individual setting, just know you probably need to slow down and kind of work with that in person and work with the group to help them see or help them get to the point where they accept it so that the therapy will be useful for them. Okay. The second one is repression. Okay. And this is suppressing memories until it disappears into the subconscious. Okay. So the basic example is a woman doesn't recall being raped. Okay. Now I want to take just a minute on this one because this is really important for anyone who is working with someone who has gone trauma. The first of all, the debate is, can someone consciously suppress a memory? Can you choose not to remember something? The answer is no. You can't consciously decide, I'm just not going to remember that horrific event. Okay. And the best example comes from a simple kind of research paradigm known as the pink elephant. Okay. The pink elephant paradigm goes something like this. I ask you all to imagine a pink elephant. Maybe it's a stuffed pink elephant. Maybe it's Dumbo that's pink. Maybe it's a live pink elephant. And once you have, now what I want you to do is I want you to forget that pink elephant. Okay. And if we were in a live class, I usually have everyone kind of raise their hand once you forgot that pink elephant. But then when I came around and I said, so what did you forget? Most of the time you'll go, oh, I forgot that pink elephant. Well, you remembered it again. Okay. Now, with that being said, although we can't consciously repress memories, the brain does have mechanisms that can block our access to remembering something. Okay. And I'll try and do this. So we have a limbic system. Okay. I'll try and kind of draw it right here, and I'm going to put it kind of right here. This limbic system, this is a poorly shaped thing. Our limbic system sits just under our cortex of our brain. Okay. And it drives things such as memory, emotions, responses to stimuli, all of those kinds of things. Okay. Well, you'll notice I kind of drew this kind of extended area here. Right here at this tip is what's known as the amygdala. The amygdala is kind of our emotional center. It actually, its primary response is to fear. Okay. But what sits just behind the amygdala is the hippocampus, which is our primary memory storage unit for our brain. Okay. When something is so fearful and highly arousing, where the brain, if the brain had a mind of its own, said, "Hey, I need to protect." Let me pick on someone. Hey, I need to protect Anita, or I need to protect Lucinda from what just happened. It has a mechanism that can help the hippocampus block that memory, okay, to where we don't have access to it. All right. Now, the issue is, and I'll give two examples, is once we feel safe, I know this sounds weird, but the amygdala and the hippocampus kind of get together and say, okay, it's okay for that person to remember now what it is that happened to them. Okay. The two examples I have is when I used to work with severely sexually assaulted individuals. I always put on my calendar to get in touch with them about 9 months later, just to check in after we've given them help and get them on their feet and whatnot. And usually, not always, but a lot of times when I called at 9 months, they were saying, "Oh, I've been meeting to get a hold of the center. I've been having anxiety attacks. I've been having night terrors, flashbacks. I smell something and I freak out, and all of these different things." Okay. And what has happened in a good majority of cases is that by 9 months post the assault, the individual usually has distance from the offender and their personal life has started to stabilize. Okay. And this is kind of where the brain says, "Oh, here you go. Here's your memories. Okay. Here's what happened to you." Okay. The other example is adults who, in their young 20s, maybe 30s, all of a sudden start remembering incest as a child. Okay. Now, I want to be very careful with this because as therapists, and it's important when you have someone who you feel has been assaulted as a child and they just can't remember it. You have to be very careful with this because in a lot of cases, we have found that individuals who had claimed incest as adults, the way the therapist questioned them, basically the therapist made them in a sense believe that they were assaulted as children when there is no evidence whatsoever. But under the proper conditions, with a properly trained therapist who is questioning someone about things that may have happened in their past, we have found that there are individuals who were assaulted in childhood and their memories are being regained as they become young adults and into adulthood. And again, what is the answer to this, or what is, I shouldn't say the answer, but what is the theory behind this, is that the brain kind of felt it wasn't safe for the person to remember those memories as long as they were under the same house as the person who was harming them. And so once they're out of the house, they're stabilized, they're on their own, taking care of themselves, the brain basically says, "Ah, here you go. Here's what happened." And they start having flashbacks and all of those kinds of things. So that's kind of the operation of repression and how it kind of works within the brain system as we know it. So, okay. So, got to gather my thoughts here. The next one is projection. Okay, and I should go back to repression. If group members start saying, or if your client starts saying, whenever we talk about this topic, I feel like I've been there, I was there, and that happened. In the case of repression, I would highly recommend that when someone starts recalling memories that they just couldn't remember, make sure you have them go see a trained therapist for a little while, because you don't want it to be a case where memories were recalled because the group process implanted it into them versus something that we really need to attend to. So I just wanted to put that out there as far as our group process is concerned. Our third thing that we should look out for is projection. Okay. And this is putting your own undesirable beliefs and behaviors onto someone else. Okay. So in this example, talking about how stupid a video game system is with someone else, believing that they must feel the same, even though they have never said so. Okay. So, so for it, some examples of projection is a person who, for example, is pedophilic, putting pedophilia on people who harm children or hurt children. Those are the pedophiles. Projection on, you'll see projection uh, when in group, in that person may be confronted with a question about their behaviors, and the person goes, "Oh no, that's not me, but you really should talk to Bill over here because I can see that happening with Bill, but no, not me, not me. I not that okay. I've seen this in Bill. I've heard it from him. We should ask that question to Bill, but I'm good." That's a form of projection, and you'll see this quite a bit again within the addiction field, saying that those heroin addicts. I drink alcohol. Those heroin addicts are the ones that have the real problem, and those types of projections onto other individuals. Okay. And again, when you see this happening as the facilitator, you need to rethink the way that you're having the group process, which we'll go through over the how do you, regain control and get through these types of mechanisms as we go through the course. But I just want you to kind of see these things as they kind of visualize them as we explain them. Okay. Regression is acting in a way that is not typical of one's age. Okay. And so a child who knows how to walk starts to crawl around because baby brother is getting so much attention for crawling. That's one example, but it's kind of a poor example in the work that we do. Okay. Again, I'm going to go back to brain processes. Our most well learned behaviors exist within the amygdala and hippocampal areas of the brain. Okay. And, but our decision to behave largely relies on information being relayed to our higher cortical areas of the brain, to the logic areas of our brain that usually, when we're not under distress, we process and we're able to act our age, as you would say. But as the brain becomes more and more and more stressed, the brain stops, kind of slows the blood flow and the signaling to the higher cortical areas, to the survival areas of the brain, which are the amygdala and brainstem. Okay. And in that survival area, what it's going to use is your most well known behaviors, the memories that it has very detailed memories of. And when do our most well-formed behaviors are learned? They're learned between about the age of 2 to about the age of 6. Okay. So when we become highly stressed, we tend to start acting more of like a child around the age of 2 or 6, especially when we're heavy stressed. Okay. And two kind of real life examples of this is let's say you and your partner are in an argument. Okay. A lot of arguments, unless they're started already in a heated mode, might start with a very logical thing like, well, we left the bread out, bread gets hard, and then we have to throw it away, and then we're wasting money. That's kind of an example. But so you think about, how you're going to approach your partner, how the conversation is going to go. But what usually happens is you approach your partner and say, "Hey, we left the bread out," and then what do? They get defensive, right? Oh, here we go again. And then that raises your emotional level, so you respond more emotionally and emotionally and emotionally and emotionally, until at one point you guys are kind of getting at each other like 2 to 6 year olds, calling each other poo poo faces and all those kinds of things, and really not start yelling at each other in more of that logical reasons. Okay. And that's an example of when the person has reverted to a regress state. Okay. Another example of a regress state is again, when when working with survivors who then have to go on the witness stand in court. Okay. Defense attorneys know regression very well, and they know what it can produce. Now, I don't know about you guys. When I was hurt as a kid, and I know a lot of other people have, when I didn't know what to do with what just happened, sometimes I would just laugh. So I'd fall off my bike and hit something or hurt something, and I'd laugh it off because I wasn't sure what the appropriate reaction was. What was okay, and then maybe I'd cry and blah, all those things. Um, and so with regression, defense attorneys know this really well. So what they tend to do is they tend to get that survivor really worked, really stressed, really pressing, very, very difficult questions, and making them heightened level of stress to where maybe on the witness stand the survivor breaks out in laughter because they're not sure what to do with this stress state. And then, of course, the defense attorney says, "Ha, look, she's laughing about it, or he's laughing about it. They think it's a joke. Judge, this should be dismissed right now." Okay. That's an example, another, I know, a sad example of regression. In the group setting, in the therapy setting, we're going to be talking a lot about looking at body language with our clients. Okay. And one way to note regression is not just through the way your clients talk, but if they start sitting in a posture that is more and more looking like a fetal position and a guarded position, like we would as children when we're concerned about the response of other people, that's what you need to pay attention to with regression, because that person, the more closed we become and the more enclosed and fetal position we become, that usually notes that that person is going through some regressive state because they're becoming so stressed about the conversation that they're not handling it very well. And again, this is where you as the facilitator or the therapist need to step back, calm the room, calm the emotional state of the room, and bring back to a constructive conversation instead of one that is stressing your client. Okay. All right. The next one is displacement. Okay. And this is showing emotion towards someone or something completely unrelated to which caused the emotion. Okay. So in their example, the alcoholic gets in a car wreck and blames it on his wife who's sitting at home. If you're going to work with individuals in the criminal justice system, displacement is probably one of the number one defense mechanisms you'll see, because a very common response among especially new offenders is, "Why are you here?" They'll say something because that a-hole called the cops, that jerk police officer, that unfair judge, and they'll blame. I had a crappy attorney, and they'll blame everyone else for their criminal behavior, but they won't say, "You know what, I messed up, and that's why I'm here." Okay. Again, if you're doing therapy in the criminal justice system, you know that you're being successful with whatever treatment you're doing when the person says, "You know what, I drank and I got in a car wreck. It was my fault. Um, uh, my behaviors are my choice." And once you start hearing those kinds of things, you know that you're heading in the right direction with whatever therapy you're providing. And so kind of think about those things, especially when you're working with those higher risk populations. Okay. And then rationalization is making up an explanation for something that happened that sounds logical in some way. So a rapist thinking that since a girl he is raping looked at him seductively one time, it must be okay to rape her. Rationalization is the basis for victim blaming, and making it so that what happened to the individual happened because they did something that caused that person to behave. Okay. And I will tell you, this is a very difficult one because not only do offenders use this, people use this to distance themselves from the idea that they may be a victim. So we do a lot of victim blaming, even if we never experienced that, because we don't want to think that just being a human being and being who we are, that someone could offend us in some way. We want to feel like we have control over how other people react to us. So it must be because something that victim did, something dysfunctional about them that caused them to experience what they experienced. Okay. And again, in the therapeutic setting, you will see this quite a bit, especially if you work with offenders of some type. Okay. They will always kind of say, well, I beat my spouse because she doesn't do X, Y, and Z. And in this example, with rapists, I raped them because they looked at me or they really wanted it. And you could tell something like that. Okay. So look for these. And again, once an individual stops using these tools, you know you're heading in the right direction. When people start using these defense mechanisms, that's when you need to stop and rethink your group process. Okay. Now, I know this was lengthy and I just introduced this very early on in the class, but I did just kind of want to put this because it is under the psychoanalytic theories of helping, because we don't always know why we go through denial or repression or regression or displacement. So I apologize for the amount of detail on this, but I do want you to make special notes about this because we'll come back to them when we learn techniques, how to help people overcome difficulties with the therapy that they're going through. Okay, so but for now, I want to leave a few minutes. We still have, just so you know, we still have we're going to get through a humanistic theory next Tuesday, which is humanistic theory. Just so you know, when we're starting the counseling process, most therapists use humanistic approach in order to gain that client provider relationship. We'll talk about the areas of life that we need to look at through using that model, the ideal self, and then we'll look at behavioral approaches and cognitive approaches, which will then later on lead us to a therapeutic approach called the cognitive behavioral treatment approach. And so this is kind of where we're headed. I just want to give you a quick preview. We'll look at some different models of helping, and then we'll start with a general model that we'll use throughout the class in understanding the helping process. Okay, but for now, I am going to stop sharing. And I'm going to turn off our recording. Not eventually. Okay, so let me, hold on.